development ministries, good finance ministries to handle our monetary policy, because we've been throwing money on some of these developing countries where technically they do not have the capacity or the infrastructure or even an educated population with the right capacities to manage these resources. So yes, number one, we are helping these countries and we are paying priority on capacity building, capacity development. Number two, we are making accountability and results-based management a cornerstone of any future development activity. And it's not only us, we are being pushed even by those who contribute to us, which is the donor countries of the world.
On the first question, I'd like to add something because it's very important to be proud of the United States. The United States was a high example of free enterprise and of extraordinary expansion. And therefore, it was a model for the rest of the world. But the model, as you know, has currently collapsed. Why has it collapsed? It has collapsed basically because this is a country that is consuming more than it is producing. In other words, it's living on borrowed money. It's living on debt. The US debt is owned by China and Germany and Japan. And so that is not sustainable. You cannot live by consuming more than you produce. And so the credit structure has completely collapsed. It has collapsed because of high wages, for example. Chief executive officers of corporations here are getting salaries. There's a chief CEO who has been given a severance package of $57 million after he was dismissed for being a crook. And so crooks are being paid severance packages in the millions of dollars. And then you have fake packaging. Third-class securities have been packaged falsely as AAA securities and have been sold. This is snake oil. Now, this model of high wages and snake oil and consuming more than than you are producing is now being questioned by the United States itself and by the closest allies of the United States, namely Germany, Japan, and Britain. And so the rest of the world can only watch in absolute astonishment and horror by saying, how could such a great example have suddenly collapsed? And the answer to that, I'm afraid you'll have to find yourself.
Can I just add something?
Yes,
I just want to add something. Along the lines that Ambassador Kamal said, I'm reading a book, but I can't get the name of it right now. It's about the Marshall Plan. And it's out there in the bookstores that has just come out and really looking at how the Marshall Plan, which really the US put together to help Europe after the Second World War. It's masterful. It's today, the Europe of today is thanks to the United States of America, what it did in the Marshall Plan. And there are so many lessons that somehow we forgot in the process as we went into development. Because if you look at the Marshall Plan, it is a fantastic plan that it's only the US could have dreamt of it. And one of the chief architects of the Marshall Plan was a gentleman by the name of Paul Hoffman. He was one of our administrators of the United Nations Development Program. After the Marshall Plan, he came into UNDP, and he, as a matter of fact, is one of the people who set up the United Nations Development Program. So at least, so we have a history there of coming in, and Paul Hoffman, and you should get that book, because if you're really interested in development, I think the whole issue of the Marshall Plan and how it was done and how it was established and how it was implemented is a fantastic thing of how when we look at development, how we address of crises today.
Over to Lehigh for two questions from Lehigh.
Good morning from Lehigh University. And Ambassador, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks very much for your time this morning. Mr. Muttukumaru, it's a pleasure to have your thoughts as well. You've certainly been very intriguing to our group this morning. We have two questions for you, so I'll turn it over to our students. Go.
My name is Amanda, and I'm an anthropology major. I've read that rising food prices may prevent the UN from reaching its goal of having the number of people whose income is less than $1 a day. Does the UNDP have any means to combat this?
Okay, second question.
Hi, my name is Sierra Lowry. I'm also an anthropology major. And my question is that in so many cases, we're seeing that free markets and capitalism are not always solving the problems in developing countries, and in fact, often increasing economic stratification. So why are the UN, the IMF, and the World Bank not pursuing less capitalistic and maybe more socialist ways to assist these developing countries?
Okay, what is the UN doing about funding? Can I just take this for a second? You see, the UN has a major project which is called FFD, which stands for Financing for Development. And it's basically because the UN has to finance itself, which is salaries, of course, but that's a very minor amount. The total budget of the UN is about 1/5 the budget of the New York police force. In other words, the UN is to take care of the whole of the world, and it does that with 1/5 the amount of money that New York takes to finance its own policemen. So that's not the major problem. The major problem is development. And for development, funds are not forthcoming. So a major meeting is going to take place next month in Doha, in Qatar. And the idea is to see whether funds will be available or not available. Now, the crisis through which we are going hits us right in the middle of the forehead, because to begin with, there was some donor fatigue in the richer countries who said, well, we are democracies, and our people are not willing to shell out more money because of donor fatigue. And now, superimposed on donor fatigue is the financial crisis. People are really worried about themselves. And so there is no doubt that money is going to trickle and dry up. And as that happens, the UN will have to readjust its targets. But more important than readjusting the targets is to identify how do you solve the problem of poverty alleviation when the money is becoming lesser and lesser. And I'm afraid I don't have an answer other than trade for that. I don't think ODA will go up. I don't think FDI will go up. But I think trade still has the potential for resolving some of our problems of funding. Your second question was, will free markets survive? I don't think so. And that is why President Sarkozy of France himself has said laissez-faire or free marketism is dead. We will have to come in with greater regulation and controls. And you see the US election from that point of view. Even the non-regulator, that is to say Senator McCain, is now beginning to talk about regulation. And so I'm afraid you will have greater regulation. I don't like the word socialism because it is politically loaded, but regulation of unbridled free markets, I think, is around the corner. Would you agree, sir?
Let me first take the issue on the first question, because I think it was focusing more on the $1 a day in terms of food prices. I think, Amanda, you raised the issue on in terms of food prices, and is it going to affect in sort of bringing down or in addressing those who are on the poverty population who are on $1 a day. And the question is, what is the effect? Let me just say is, and you asked me what is UNDP doing. Again, I want to say is that UNDP in alone, we don't work on our own. We do certain things on our own in the broader concept of development, but we bring the other parts of the UN system into this fold. And if I focus on the food issue, I would look at World Food Program. I would look at the Food and Agriculture Organization. I think it's interesting, if any of you have a chance on the internet, it's useful to get a recent study on the food crisis by the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And it's a very good study whereby, and I just want to come in with a few points, where it raises the challenges on the food crisis. And it says, it talks about a humanitarian threat, a development threat, and a strategic threat. And the reason, as you said, Amanda, it is a fact that when with the food prices increasing, it is going to be a challenge for the UN system and the world community to be able, and it's going to put a spoke in the wheels of all what we have been planning both the energy crisis issue, both the economic crisis issue, and the food crisis issue, call it a triple threat, they are all going to put a big spoke in terms of this whole issue of